Charlie's mom died when he was 15. With his father and younger brother, Charlie has experienced firsthand how a family gets through this great challenge together. Today, Charlie is a psychotherapist who helps others cope with the loss and grief of a loved one. His personal and professional experience gives him a unique opportunity to inspire and inform. Here is his story.
She had cancer for about 4 to 6 months before she died, and had been fighting it on and off, but it was sort of murky to me. She had gone to the hospital over the years for mysterious visits that were left a mystery to me and my brother. But then she took quite ill, went into the hospital, and then there's a whole story that unfolds from that. You have to understand it was a different time. It was 1964. Attitudes were different then. She went in, but she was not told why. My father and the doctors, or my father had the doctors collude with him in a lie about, I don't even know what story he told her or they told her, but she was not told that she had cancer. And as it got worse, she was not told that it was terminal. Somewhere in the middle of that stage, sometime in the fall, she died in January. In the fall, my father took me aside and told me that she has cancer, and about a month later told me that she was dying. It was a time where knots were tied inside my gut that took me many years to untie and work out. And probably has a lot to do with why I became a therapist, because I needed a lot of psychotherapy. I was pretty much a mama's boy at that age. I was 14 at the time, and I was very close to her. And closer to her than I was to my father. Closer to her than I was to probably anybody. And when he told me that A, she had cancer, and B, we're not to tell her, suddenly everything got shifted between me and my mother, where I had to live a lie. And I couldn't confide with her about what the most important thing that's going on in her life, and the most important thing going on in my life at the time. So there was a shift that she didn't know about. She was pretty perceptive. She might have picked up something, I don't know. But I knew about, where suddenly that connection between her and I was ruptured. And I was left feeling bereft and mourning, in a way, the death of the relationship before it happened. My father was not a... it's hard to define him and categorize him. He was not a simple man, but he certainly was a resilient man. And although he was in deep grief for a long time, which he nursed with alcohol and seeing a therapist for a little while, and he nursed by taking up painting and painting through the grief. But he also was able to show up for me and my brother. I was 15, my brother was 9, and it still makes me feel very moved and touched when I think of how he stepped up and was able to really let us talk about it, and frankly, and and deal with it, and he took care of us as best as he knew how, and he was pretty damn good at it, and I'm eternally grateful. When I was in my 20s, and I brought up that my mother had died when I was 15, but I thought I had dealt with it, he said, "No, you can't when you're 15. you can't really adequately mourn until you're an adult. And he was right. At age 15, I didn't really know how to completely mourn. I could barely, after the funeral, it was hard for me to even feel deeply about the loss. The way I did it, the way I coped is to get it out, is I imagined what my father was going through. And it still gets to me. And his loss. I mean, this was the woman, this was his, he met her when they were both teenagers, you know. And so this was the love of his life. So when I thought of his loss, I was able to vicariously mourn. Well, that's not quite the word, but I was able to mourn by thinking of what he must be going through. And then I was able to cry for him. I wasn't able to cry for myself until many years later. I don't know how they handle it now. I'd be curious to know. At the time, what they did is this thing where, oh, Charlie, in class, Charlie, could you run down to the principal's office, and I have this message for, I have this assignment he gave me. Could you just please give it to him, so to get me out of the classroom? And then the teacher would tell the class, by the way, Charlie's mother died. And then I'd come back into the class, and people would be almost imperceptibly different, but a little different and a little kinder. My friends were sympathetic, of course, and they didn't know, they were my age, they didn't mostly know about how to handle, how to help somebody go through something like that. But they were they were there. They were there. One thing that really happened to me at the time, I mean, as you see, it was a 4-person family. The only woman died, so it left, there was no female energy left in the house. And I felt that very strongly. I wasn't conscious of it, and I didn't use those words at the time. But I was it was like a kind of a desert type of feeling for me. Like there was only male energy, no female energy. It's like getting sunshine without any rain. I felt parched in a way. And it wasn't until 2 years later, when my soon-to-become high school sweetheart, when I was 17, came to visit me one day in the house, that I realized, oh, it's been 2 years since there's been female energy in our house. And what a wonderful relief. It's like gentle rain on desert sand. So it felt wonderful. In our lifetime, the whole culture has come a long way, and it's more acceptable, especially for men, to talk about what they're feeling, and that helps. So any family, I would always counsel to the adult to let their children, encourage them to speak their minds, speak their hearts about what it is they're feeling and what they're going through, without judging them, without trying to change their feelings. A kid could be going through anything from grief to detachment to anger even. Just let them be where they are and keep the lines of communication open. As far as strategies of how adults should handle this, again, it's mostly looking out for any behavior that could possibly, potentially come from grieving that's not being done in a good way, and understanding that often a child is in shock on some level and probably feels the need, I felt the need to cover it up. and to just act as normal as I could. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be treated suddenly as different and as somebody odd or other. I wanted to be treated normally, and so, I'm sure most children do want to be treated normally, and that needs to be respected, but also to be understood that on some level they're in shock. That's going to take a little time. At the same time, during our lifetime, it's gotten better, that people can talk more openly, and there's the whole hospice profession that has helped so many of the dying and their families and friends. At the same time, it's become a more death-denying culture in a way. This culture is so youth-obsessed and so repulsed by aging and aging people that it's sort of there's an underlying silent message of don't get old, and it's an unnatural state, and dying is the most unnatural thing of all. That's a silently transmitted message that I think we receive on some level. And the way to combat that is to understand that aging is, of course, the most natural thing in the world. The only option is a premature death, the only other option. And dying is, to use that cliche, it's a part of life. It really is. It's everybody dies. Everybody's born, everybody dies. I was fortunate enough to be born Jewish, and Jews in particular have a ritual around death that I think is very helpful and useful. When the person dies, the whole family gathers, and there's a ritualized period of mourning called sitting Shiva, where you go and you sit with the mourning people for 10 days or so. And it's understood that people will go through mourning for a long time, and the spouse especially, of course. And then at the 1 year juncture, there is what is known as an unveiling, where people go to the gravesite and the headstone is unveiled. And so a year later, people have a way of coming together at the grave for additional prayers and processing. So I was lucky to be born into this faith, but I think the society and culture as a whole is in need of rituals. Obviously, there are many, and not just Jews, but Christians of all stripes and others too have their ways of dealing with death and dying. Wakes, of course, and other ways. But I would recommend to any family to develop their own ritual, whatever that might be. And it might be one event that they come together on and do together, or it might be an ongoing ritual that happens every week or every month for a while. The system is traumatized, even if you're prepared for it. You can be prepared for somebody dying, and when they do, you might not be surprised, but you'll be shocked. And you have to understand that that's part of what you're going to be going through for a while. So it's a time to take particularly good care of yourself as far as diet and exercise and sleep is concerned. As if you were going through something that is not just a blow to your being emotionally or spiritually, but physically too. It's hard on the body. It really is. There's a very gruesome statistic that, thank God, you have not lived up to, which is that when a spouse dies, often, I don't know exactly what the figures are, but often within a year the other spouse dies because it's just more than they can bear. And it's obviously physical as well as emotional. I think men in particular, we are socialized to have our own way of dealing with dying or the loss of a loved one, and we're socialized to tough it out or work it through, meaning work through it. Do your job at the office or wherever you do your job, and plow yourself into work. That's how many men cope. It's a coping mechanism. I wouldn't want to put it down. I wouldn't want to rob men of that, but it's not enough. It can help you through it, hunkering down, isolating yourself. These are other ways that men tend to do it. Some of that is probably necessary, but we tend to do it to an extreme, and it can help us get through the shock period, but it doesn't heal the heart. And it's the heart that needs healing, and that basically best comes through friends, talking to friends and family about the stuff that is deepest inside of you. I would say that that sounds like a practical approach. It certainly makes logical sense. It might not. The danger in it is that you can go on and face the future inadvertently carrying what is known as baggage, because although you're sure you want to put it behind you and just look forward, there's no getting around what happened. And so if used as a kind of denial that this is going to affect me any longer because I'm not going to let it, that's going to trip you up, especially when it comes to your next relationship, where you're going to be bound to have the tendency to compare the new person and the old person, and other stuff that will get in the way. But there is something to be said for a practical approach where you don't want to wallow forever in the past, and you don't want to wallow forever in self-pity and licking your wounds. There's a time where you need to do that, and a time where you need to move on and let that go. And knowing when to do that is not an easy thing to determine. But then when you get practical and you want to move forward, and you'll see how your new relationships work out, and that will tell you a lot about how ready you really are to move forward. Well, it's interesting. I mean, this happened when I was 15. I'm now 63, and you can tell just by looking at me now how not far beneath the surface this whole all this still lies. And I've dealt with it up and down for a long time, but it can always make me tear up. So my mother was a very special person, and a Jewish mother in a way, meaning that she loved me dearly, was completely devoted to me, really emphasized the life of the mind and reading and education, and encouraged me to read the New York Times every day and have a mind of my own and think clearly. She was also, you know, a human being with flaws, and she was a little intrusive and didn't quite respect my boundaries as a separate individual, and like a lot of mothers, or but she was a pretty unusual woman. She was a child of the Depression, a lifelong devoted left-leaning Democrat. She belonged to an organization at the time called SANE, which was, I don't know exactly what SANE stood for, but it was an organization for a sane nuclear policy. In other words, to stop atomic testing in the atmosphere and things like that. Had she lived longer, would have probably been a vehement opponent of the Vietnam War, and probably a staunch feminist, I would imagine. But she died before those things really emerged strongly. She was also the one who really introduced me to Judaism, made sure that I was bar mitzvahed, and our rabbi was a remarkable person of his own, who was who taught me about Judaism as a pursuit of social justice, and he went on what were known as the Freedom Rides in the South, where white clergy would ride with black clergy. He strangely died at around the same time, also of cancer, maybe a year or two before my mom. And she was certainly, like I say, a devoted mother and a devoted wife, that's for sure. She was mostly a housewife, as most women were at that time. When we were a little short of money, she was the only member of the family at that time to have graduated high school. My father certainly did not. And he was a good businessman. He made a good living, but when his business faltered, she went out for a while to become a secretary for a little while, but mostly she was a homemaker. What I have learned myself about this strange animal called grief is that it's sort of like a wild stallion that you have mounted whether you wanted to or not, and you have to ride it. And sometimes it's not in your control. And sometimes it's calm, and then when you're not looking, it's like really hitting you from below when you least expect it. And you just have to ride it as best you can. Talking about it and dealing with the feelings as they come up is the best way I know how. If you're going through a period where you have to concentrate on work, or you have to concentrate on taking care of others, like your children or other family members, and you don't want the grief to get in your way, the best strategy is to ritualize a time every week, like a therapy session, or getting together with others going through the same thing every week or once a month or whatever, to deal with it, so you can get out your feelings there and then go back to your life. But it's a strange animal, and it has a life of its own, and you need to ride it as long as it's going, because it has its own rhythm, and it's different for you than for the next person. And it's a unique experience for everyone, and not altogether a negative one. I mean, it's certainly an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody, but you can actually benefit from it. You can grow from it. I have grown and benefited enormously from going through this, partly because I found a way, like you have, Lenny, to turn the crap that was handed to us into fertilizer to help others. And you have found a way to use this to help others. And I think ultimately that's part of the healing process for anyone going through it. If they can find a way to help others go through it, it's a way of coming out of yourself and not just being immersed or submerged in all your own grief. Helping others can be healing for you. So, and it can just make us three-dimensional beings. When you go through grief, you're never the same. And it's not just the pain or the wound of loss, where when you break a bone and it heals, it's stronger than the bones around it. We're strongest in the broken places. When we heal from the loss, there's a strength there. I tell you, when you go through that, you can go through anything. At the time, when I was a teenager, the only music I knew was rock and roll, and I didn't know how to use it to heal me. In later years, I learned, and this is a different kind of grief. It was grieving the end of my marriage, not a death, but it was the death of a marriage. I used music to soothe me, and I found certain types of so-called New Age music, or to heal my heart. And sometimes I would just put on music and allow myself to cry or to just feel my pain, and it would wash over me like warm water on a cold day, and it would be very healing for me and help me get through it. I mean, any creative pursuit, whether it's movement, whether it's writing, whether what my father did with painting, anything that can, you use the pain, you use it to transform it, and transform yourself by expressing through any artistic way, and dancing is certainly a way of moving through the feelings, because the quickest way out is through. It's a spiritual essence, and to know that that will continue, and those brief flickers of moments when I've been able to get in touch with the spirit in me, these are ways that have helped me deal with my mortality.